the quality of it, and which means that very often location is a problem, and young directors, but not necessarily, but definitely young directors, do not pay attention to location. So it means that they choose the location for a look without thinking that the audio will be just horrific, and they want to have a beautiful romantic scene with the moon behind, but below it's a highway. And all romanticism is just gone because you have to ADR the entire scene. So you compromise the performance in a sense, right? ADR very seldom really matches the real production. As great as the actors can be, the authenticity of it is somehow gone. I don't know if the average audience realize that, but maybe if they could see both, they would feel that something is somewhere missing, especially when you have to replace the entire dialogue of the entire scene. There's lacking of time very often on production. The sort of sound recordists are not really treated well on location because it's always rush and they are the last one to have time. There is more and more, I'm finding that because the technology allows that, most of the scenes are, the recorders, the directors are requiring the lavaliers besides the boom. So the skill of booming actually it's sort of less and less because there is nobody to train. The lavalier is a safe microphone, but it's not a nice microphone. It's actually, I mean, ugly is an exaggeration, but it doesn't have a warmth, doesn't have a depth, and it's much more difficult to EQ if you want to find some depth and beauty of the voice. It has smaller range, so it's much more difficult to match. It's easier to mix though. It's because there is no noise coming with it, which normally from the boom you would get this. So, you know, there is not really one problem with the location sounds, but mostly it's just simply not carefully chosen location. Of course, sometimes you cannot do that, but very, very often you have no idea how often there would be a scene in the restaurant which they locked, they removed everything, and they forgot to turn off one fridge. And you have this hum which is sort of obnoxious and ugly, and this could be avoided. So it's sort of lacking of carefulness very often. And, you know, we then have to deal with that. Recently, I worked on a very actually interesting film which was recorded by the French sound location recordist. And he went overboard. So the complication of it was such that to cut the dialogue and make sense out of it and then to mix took us at least twice as long. I don't think I ever worked, and I'm doing this for 30 years, on a much more difficult dialogue editing as on this job. Only because it was just simply overdone by the production mixer. He wanted to sort of do too much, and at the end it didn't pay off. To really get the best possible production sound is to plan it. Like with everything, really, when you think about it, right? More thought we give to any process is ahead of us, then the outcome will be better. So it's once again, it's just planning. It's just simply really anticipating, why am I shooting this scene? What combination of microphones I need to use? How should I place the mic so it's not noisy? And on the lower budget films, very often, if you have the scenes outside, you cannot stop the traffic because there is no money, there is no production. So then sometimes it's worth it to think, do I really need this building behind on this street, which has no difference in the story? It's not a part of the story. So it very often sort of really is lacking of planning that and thinking twice of maybe I can compromise because then I don't have to ADR the scene, or I actually have a nicer sound. If I cannot afford ADR, then I will have a better sound for the scene. So I think sort of the bottom line is really, I keep repeating myself, it's just planning. To get the better sound is planning. But also, and there's another aspect of it, to think who your location mixer is. Very often there's almost like an afterthought, right? The directors, producers are spending a lot of time looking for the best DP they can afford. They have it, and then they're saying, oh my God, this film needs sound. And then they scramble. And you have no idea how many times I would work, especially on the lower budget films, or the first time director, when they don't have experience yet, they don't have a crew yet, they don't know yet the sort of this lower level of film people who are needed to make the project happen. So it's an afterthought. So then somebody recommends somebody, and then I would have 4 recording mixers on one project because they keep firing them. So there is lacking of consistency, right? Then somebody's fired. It's not going to share what microphones they used or what combinations they had used. And then I have to deal with sort of 5 different styles of recording. And then it's up to me as a dialogue editor, how am I going to cut this so actually mixer can mix this and not lose his hair or his mind, in the process. Because also the mix has the limits. It's on the lower budget films. There is not endless amount of time, days and hours to mix. So like everything, there is a compromise. So better you plan in ahead, the better outcome it is. Well, I need the locked picture, meaning I need the QuickTime. I need the version of the picture, right, which I can be imported to Pro Tools, the software which we are using professionally to edit dialogue, or all sound actually. Then I need something which is called OMF or AAF, which don't ask me what it stands for. I checked a million times and never memorized. It's a software which is needed to translate the layout of the tracks from the software for the picture editing to the sound. I need the sound reports. I need all the sound rolls recorded. So even if in the film, the takes which are used, not all of them are used in the cut, I need the access to entire production sound recorded on location, which allows me to fix a lot of problems. I cut the small syllables, I look for alternate takes, alternate reading, not for the performance, but for just literally replacing some syllable because there was a noise or there was a dropout, or there will be a million reasons why I need an access. So I need the sound reports, I need the script, the line script, and I need the audio, entire audio recorded on location. And essentially then they can get lost and I can do my job. I need to spot with the director and the picture editor. Mostly I need a list from them of the ADR which they need for the performance reasons. Either there are additional lines because some plot is sort of missing and something has to be added, or they don't like the performance and want to replace it. So this is what I need from the picture editor and director because they work obviously together. The technical aspect of the ADR, it's sort of my job. So then I have to sort of screen the film and listen to very carefully and create an additional list, which is only for the technical reason. It happens more and more often, unfortunately, that the assistants on the picture side don't really know what it will be needed when the picture is locked and this project is given to the next people, meaning sound editors. And because of lacking of really thought and understanding the process, the workflow, they do not organize the files in the Avid or Final Cut Pro, or I cannot speak about Premiere. I don't know really how the Premiere works in a sense, what is the file management. So I cannot really sort of talk about the Premiere. But Final Cut Pro and Avid, such a simple thing like labeling files while they are loading them, importing them into the Avid or to the Final Cut Pro. Because if there is a logic behind their process, even if it's not the way how I think, if there is a consistency, then I can find out the system they have and adjust to it, right? I'm not saying that they have to do it the way how I want it. I just want them to do it how they want it, but be consistent. So very often the file management is very, very odd or doesn't exist really. So the files would have one name, which then come to me with the OMF, but the original files in the sound rolls, to use the old language, have a completely different, they have just simply the data naming. So I have to have 5 papers to cross-reference what belongs to what and which take is. It takes enormous amount of time. And if I want to do a decent job and I want to actually look for the alternate readings or the backgrounds or the tones recorded on location, for me to find it, I have to be a Sherlock Holmes. And on the lower jobs, lower budget jobs, there is very often, I have an assistant for the beginning of the job and for the end. I don't have him or her between. So this all falls on my laps. So essentially, instead of spending time and attention on the detail of dialogue and precision of it, I'm shuffling through the papers trying to find a take because I need to replace something. So it's very frustrating, and it really comes from the fact that very often people who are on the beginning of the process don't understand why it's so important for me to find it. And fortunately, Avid becomes, because Avid is owned by, or Pro Tools are owned by Avid, is the same company, and they are sort of, the language becomes the same. They are sort of switching the names, which used to be in Pro Tools, are now the same with the Avid. So this helps to communicate with the assistants, because at least we are speaking the same language. And also, I learn Avid so I can find something now. If I need the old, I said, just don't give this to me in the format for familiar for the Pro Tools. I will find it through the Avid, because in the Avid they have some kind of system. But they never label this correctly, so if it goes over to the new software, actually, I can find it very easily. I don't know if this makes sense or it's too convoluted. It makes sense? Because it's a very, very technical thing, but it sort of really bothers everybody who cuts dialogue. The process of editing dialogue starts, as I mentioned before, at the spotting session with the director and picture editor. So usually the entire sound crew, which would be the sound effects editor, the supervisor, dialogue editor, and an assistant, we come to the spotting session with the director and editor. We watch the film, and while we are watching the film, I'm sort of very carefully listening then how it's recorded. And my first question is, did you use in the Avid the mixed track, or you actually have multi-tracks? So then I know, okay, this sounds horrible, but probably it's a mixed track, so I must have the separation. Probably boom sounds better, or maybe I can use the combination of boom. So while we are watching the film, I already my brain starts listening for more for the detail sound-wise than the content of the film, because I saw the film before I come to the spotting session. I know what I'm going to work on. And then, as I mentioned before, I would get the list from the director of the ADR, which they need for the creative aspect of it. Then we talk about the group ADR. Is there budget for the SAG actors to actually come to the studio and record Wallace or some additional lines or not? Because this all prepares me of how detailed do I have to be, how much I have to create what is given to me, or how much I can go outside because there is money actually to record something additionally. Also, I have to know how many days of the mix there is in the budget, because I cut completely different way, knowing that I have 10 days to premix 90 minutes film, premix dialogue, or I have 3 days. I have to take in consideration the next person, meaning mixer. Of course, I can be a complete ass and say, I don't care, and cut this the way how it's supposed to be, really, how I think, but then I'm really he's thinking. He cannot perform the great job as a mixer if I give too complicated layout of the tracks. If we had 10 days, the film would benefit, but it's only 3. I have to remember that it's very important that he has only 3 days. So I have to think about that. So having this knowledge, when I start cutting, I just simply cut a different way. I cannot look for a million alternates to then audition them at the mix, because it can take an hour for the director to make a decision if the word yes, 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 which one is better, right? So I just simply don't give the option. So I give options only when technically it's impossible what the picture editor use, because they use for the visual, not really paying attention to the audio. If the scene is very chopped up, how we would say, meaning that it's really very, very cutty, it's very difficult. It's difficult only because very often the tones from the different angles of the camera are changing, and to create this very smooth so the mixer can actually mix it almost without, there is always, of course, a big effort, but the tones is not changing from angle to angle. And when it's very, very chopped up, I have to pay attention to how to tone it out, not to create too many layers of additional noise, but at the same time, he has to know how to get out from one tone and to get to another. So it sounds like they are sitting in the same room and it's the same location. So I think this is sort of, I don't even know if it's really difficult in a sense. It's very time consuming. Working with actors who are wearing dentures, it's not easy, because the dentures have a tendency to create a lot of clicky noises, and they really shouldn't be there unless the character is an old person who is wearing dentures. So it's a different story. But it's just simply an old actor, and we are pretending these are beautiful pearl teeth he has or she has, then my job is to take out as much as possible. So this is very time consuming. And this especially when you cut narration, but also in the regular sort of narrative films with the dialogue of people talking, I have to pay attention to it. When the crew is very noisy, the camera crew, and they are constantly dropping something or there is some shift or movement, then I have to remove this because the image doesn't justify this noise, right? So I have to look for the alternate takes and see if I can replace the syllable. I have to mark this for the ADR to be replaced. And, so with the experience today, I know what I can get away with. 15 years ago, I didn't. So I very often overdid, adding a lot of work for myself. Today, of course, sort of like with everything, right? With the experience, the judgment is sort of better. You judge your own decisions more than when you don't have an experience yet. And so it's the whole dialogue editing. It's a very technical craft. There is some level of creativity, of course, but it's not the creativity the way how we think about soundtrack, right? We think about the sound design, the music, the explosions, the tones changing, the whales singing, whatever there would be. Dialogue is a sort of very technical aspect of it. And I very often tell my students that, which it almost seems like I'm patting myself on the back, but I don't mean it, that everybody can cut effects, meaning that if you have imagination and you have an image, you can add the sounds. They may be not done perfectly, but you can create it because it's in front of you, right? With the dialogue, if somebody doesn't teach you how to do that, then you don't know how to do that. And it's very apparent when you come to the mix and sort of everything jumps and it's not well done dialogue editing. Nobody knows that it's well done. When it's not done well, then everybody hears this. It's essentially this is what it is. So it's a very thankless job, sort of, but I like it a lot, actually. It takes me to some zone which I just remove myself from the reality. And very often I don't even listen to the content of spoken word. I just listen to the way how it's delivered. I'm just looking for mistakes or I'm listening for mistakes. And I think being a foreigner actually helps, because in some ways I can actually cut out understanding of English if I really want to, and I'm not disturbed by it. I had a friend who is Serbian who also cuts dialogue, and we very often exchange these observations that we can sometimes cut the whole scene, and when somebody asks me, so what was the dialogue? I think it's scene about something, but if some editors can literally quote, right, lines. I very seldom can. Actually, even I spend so much time listening to the same line over and over. You ask me to repeat it, I will give you the sense of it, and I think it's really because I'm a foreigner and I can cut out English if I want to some extent, of course. I have a sort of like a very, set up way of preparing for the dialogue editing. So when I get the material from the picture department, and let's assume that I don't have an assistant, then I get the OMFs, I open them, and the first thing I do is save as. So I sort of keep the original session, which came from the picture department, as a sort of virgin session nobody touched, because if something goes wrong, I know that I have a place to go back. So this is sort of like a absolutely must do, that I'm not putting myself in the corner that something goes wrong, I cannot go back to something. Then I usually create, so I have in the session, I import the picture, I have the OMF. Let's say that the OMF, when it's a multi-track recording, sometimes I have 24 tracks of just OMF, which is maddening. And if the assistant editor, picture editor, or editor, him or herself, don't really organize this well, it's a mess. So very often, if it's like a real mess, that the music is on the same track where the dialogue, and then they cut some car and car horn, and then person talks, and there are crossfades, drives me crazy. So I just simply create this, as I said, I do the save as, meaning I make a copy of it, and I reorganize this. Because for two reasons. First of all, I'm very anal, so I sort of have to have this organized, but also then I know that there is a very small chance I will miss a line, right? Because if you think about it, if somebody cuts very small, short files, if it's crossfade with the music, I may not even notice there was a file there. So if I reorganize everything and sort of put this in the categories that this is the dialogue and production, these are edit effects, because very often picture editors are adding effects just to enhance the screenings, which they do for producers or directors. And then I put the music. So then I know that I definitely, there is a very much smaller chance that I will miss a line, which happens, right? It happens essentially all the time. What is very important also is that I have what I call, because I am old, guide track, and it comes from the time of the film. Today, most of the editors, young editors, refer this as a reference track. Essentially, it's what it's married to the QuickTime, which comes from the Final Cut Pro or Avid. It's an entire sound which is then spread into the OMF. It's important to me because if I see that I have a waveform on the guide track and I have a hole in the OMF, it means that something didn't make it. So I have to call the picture department and say, there is this footage, or this time code rather, I should say, something is missing. So it's like a double check. You know, first of all, we are humans, so we are making mistakes, and on the top of it, we are using a very advanced technology, which sometimes fails. So we have to sort of keep checking, or I have to keep checking constantly. So having that done, I create usually 8 dialogue tracks, and I label them dialogue 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, blah, blah, blah. If I have the ADR, I already create the ADR tracks. I create tracks which I called X and Y, which essentially are like sort of trash tracks. Because if there is something on the editor included this, but it's literally a noise on the track. Somebody bangs something and doesn't belong there, it doesn't happen on the screen. I cut this out and I put this on the X or Y track. Because very often, you'll be surprised how often, the director is so accustomed to this bang, it gives him or her some kind of a rhythm. And all of a sudden the mixer is saying, it's missing! And it's a panic, right? Then I know that I didn't delete anything. I said to the mixer, it's on the X or Y track. You can just bring this in or you can heal the region, depends. So it's like a safety. A lot of work which we do professionally, because we are doing this for somebody else, we are sort of higher hands, we have to respect what they have created. And even if my opinion will be it's a junk, it's a mess, I have to somehow make this work. And if I think it's really a mess, I put this on the alternate tracks. I never delete anything. Partially comes from the fact that if somebody asks me, I know where to find it. I don't have to think. I don't have to go back 3 weeks back and say, what did I do with that? I actually know I put this on the XY track. So it's easier to find it, right? So because the mix costs, whatever, $350 an hour, there is no time for my mistakes to be then, somehow corrected at the moment when we are mixing, because it's a pressure on me then. And what I do, I cut scene by scene to come back now sort of to the logic of my work. So I usually just simply copy from the OMF the file, a take, into my dialogue track. And then I expand this and I see what I have. I listen, I see what is wrong, what is not wrong. I look at the image. Many people think that you sort of can cut dialogue without really looking at the image, but actually you have to, because you have to see that people walk and there is no movement because they chop this up because the other actor is talking. I look for the different takes and I create this movement. I know that there will be Foley's edit, but I come from the very old school, which is really sort of not really existing, or maybe it does, the school itself exists, but it's not practiced. One of the great mixers, Lee Dichter, said that essentially the film should play with the production edited only. The rest, it's really, this is like a spinal of the film. First of all, it's a story in it because the actors are delivering the lines. The whole film is, the content of it is in the written word, which is then performed. But everything else, what is happening on the screen, definitely was in some ways recorded. So my job is to make this as smooth as possible that I can watch it without addition of anything. and it should sort of hold, right? It should keep the audience engaged. Very few people cut this way anymore because mostly they don't have time. The younger generation doesn't know. And I am guilty of the fact that I'm not teaching the younger generation. I teach them in school, but there is a very limited amount of time. You know, this is not a school about dialogue editing, it's a school about film, right? They want to learn about film, they want to learn about sound, but I have to negotiate with myself if I am teaching them dialogue editing or I'm teaching them the aesthetic of what you really have to look for. They're not going to master in a semester the precision of dialogue editing, so they have to understand what it requires, and then they have to take this on their own in a sense. And if they're lucky and they want to do that, they find somebody who will, on the job in a sense, teach them, which I do with some of my assistants, which some of them actually are the school graduates. But to go back to the question what I do, so I literally do take by take, cut by cut. I move this to the next track, and when I'm done with the scene, I mute what is on the OMF. So I know that it's done. I don't have to go back to it. Because sometimes it is that I cut for 2 days and then I go to the session, ADR session for 3 days. When I come back the 5th day, if I didn't mute, if I didn't mark for myself when I finished, it would take me time to go back to it. It wouldn't take me much time. It's sort of the way, I'm very visual also, so it helps me to see where I am. I do a lot of markers. For those of you who know Pro Tools, you can do the markers, and I make notes. Either for myself, I have to go back to something, or I make notes for the mixer. I'm sorry, this tone, it's horrible, but I couldn't make anything better. So when he mixes, he can actually see. He knows that it's some, sort of something which he will have to deal with, that he will fall into, I don't know, some trouble. So he's prepared for it. And also because I will not remember 5 weeks after I finish cutting this, why I really did something. So I very often write. If I cut the alternate takes, which I do a lot, when the time allows, when there is a decent amount of time given to the premix dialogue. I also make notes why I cut this line of ADR, of the alternate take. What was the problem that I was looking for and I'm trying to resolve? Because sometimes I listen, I'm thinking, well, you know what, actually this original sounded okay. Why did I cut the alt? Because I was in the different space. I was so close to it that it really sounded horrible. Now in the context, 5 weeks later, the scene plays. There is really nothing wrong with it. So it's a double check for me, but also making this note, the mixer says, oh, this is why you did it. Oh, you know what, actually, now I hear it too. Let's try. So it's a game, it's a play, it's a puzzle which you constantly keep resolving and sort of building the new one. I finish the reel. I always screen the reel, and very, 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 very often I'm saying, was I deaf? Why this is there? It doesn't happen in many places, but in a 20 minutes reel, I at least have 1 or 2 episodes like that. And very often it's because I thought that I finished, the phone rang, I pick up, I spoke to somebody, I look, I said, oh, I finished this, I move on. Or I was so deep into the scene that at a certain point you start hearing. You actually start hearing. Everything starts sounding either very bad or very, very good. So it's time to step up and just leave. Very often I do that when I work. And, I'm talking about 11 hours a day with the headphones. It's not 3 hours a day. It's 11, 12 hours a day with the headphones of the words bombarding you with the different noises. It's a fatigue. So that's why it's very, very important to actually screen your work. Like give yourself a day break and then screen it and see. What also is the way how I approach the dialogue editing is that sometimes I start editing actually not from reel 1, but from reel 2 or 3. Because really, for the mix purposes, it doesn't matter. At the end, I'm coming with everything cut. Because usually the beginning of the film is always the most labored by the director, by the picture editor, because they are so in it and then they are loosen up. So if I start farther, I'm actually learning their way of working, because by the time they're in reel 3, the picture editor already found her or his way of how to deal with the tracks recorded. So it gives me sort of like a very good blueprint to then go back to the beginning and see, okay, he or she really just overkill it, but I know how it's recorded. I'm already, because I'm so far into the film. So I'm actually cutting better the real one. I'm setting up then later example for how to start the film. The main misconception students who I teach have is that you split dialogue by the character. So if it's a two-shot and two people are talking to each other, they will chop this in half and put John on dialogue 1 and Sophie on dialogue 2. And takes me always at least 4 classes to tell them, don't do that. You don't split dialogue by character. You split this by the angle of the camera, by the shot. Because it means that it doesn't matter if it's a single shot or double shot. If we are on angle A, on the shot A, the microphone is pointed in this direction. So everything what is behind, the tone which comes with my dialogue is the same for John as Sophie, right? But then if we switch this and we are doing the profile or side shot, then all of a sudden microphone is facing this, it's a different tone. This is how I split it. I split the dialogue by shots. Because the audio, as the camera is changing, the angle of the microphone is changing. It means it's picking up the different background from the same location, from the same room, from the different corner. You know, so this is why I split it, because each tone comes, each angle, each shot comes with a slightly different tone from the location. So the mixer has to EQ it to make the sound like they are sitting in the same room. So I am helping him. For me, it really doesn't matter in a sense, right? For how I hear it. But because when I sort of do a lot of tones which are fading in and out and overlapping on my headphones, it sounds beautiful. But he has to process each of the tones, EQing the different frequency which is not there, meaning it shouldn't be there because some hum or low end or whatever there is. So when I do that the first 2 tracks are for the shot A and the next one for C and D, whatever, it's easier for him. Because another thing which is very important, it doesn't matter if you cut effects or you cut backgrounds or dialogue, is that there has to be consistency because our work goes to the mixer. So clearer I am in my layout, I'm giving him a map. He has 1/10 of a time which I had to learn the film. So simpler, or even if it's not simple, but it's sort of clear, the tracks are organized, it allows him to mix better. So at the end, the film sounds better because he doesn't have to keep switching the gears and trying to understand what my concept was. And that's why very often we work with the same mixers, and mixers like to work with certain editors. We think alike. Or if I work with the same mixer for many years, he knows how I prepare my tracks. And he's adaptable. He will know that I prepare this different way than the other editor, but he knows how, because I'm consistent in my way of presenting the tracks to him. So that's why you split the tracks. Essentially, you split them to help mixer to mix. This is really what it is. The alternate takes is another sort of animal for the dialogue editing. Different editors have a different approach to it. They sort of treat them different way. They throw them all over the place whenever they have a space on the timeline. I have a tendency to be very organized. So it's easier also for me to sort of think, right? When I look at my sessions, I know what I've done. So I used to have designated tracks for the alternate takes, like 1 or 2. Today, since Pro Tools, I think 9 or 8, I don't even remember, you can actually color code the audio file itself. So when I cut alternates, I just color them red. So the mixer knows that whatever red is on the tracks is an alternate take. I used to, before the color coded, there were markers and I would make notes. Before markers existed in Pro Tools, I would have a book, which I still do. Anytime I cut something, I make note why I did it. So I know that there is an alt and I know why it's written and I mean why it's chosen. So essentially I treat the alternates, I just simply color code them red. And it's obvious that it's something which wasn't intended by the director, it's something which I'm adding, it's new, let's listen to it, watch out, there is some trouble with the original take, that's why there are alternate versions of it. Production sound effects is another animal, and there is a there is a sort of like a misconception, well, maybe not even misconception, it's a mistreatment of it. Meaning, the lower budget, then more you should split production effects from the dialogue and put them on the tracks called production effects. Unfortunately, and only because it saves the low budget film on Follies. Because if you have to create the international version, all of a sudden the sound recorded, somebody moving, jumping without dialogue, can be utilized as on the FX stem, right? So then you don't have to Foley it, it's there for the international version, meaning I split it from the dialogue. I just create the additional production effects tracks and any movement which can be saved, I split on the separate tracks, so they can then end up on the FX stem. The problem is that on the low budget films, they don't give you enough time to do that, in a sense. Because to do that well, so the production effects can end up in the FX stem and dialogue still is very integral, I have to create more tones. I have to have in and outs. Otherwise, it's a one long take, they move and talk, and there is a lot of movement, but I don't split it. It's faster for me. It's okay for the mixer because he doesn't have to match anything. It's also faster for him too, so it's generally faster. But then, at the end, either the director and producer don't have a decent M&E, or not knowing they pay for the Follies to fill in these gaps which actually exist on the dialogue track. Because if you don't split it, they ended up on dialogue stem for the national version, the dialogue stem is gone, and then you have only music and effects, and you have holes. So it's a sort of like, it's a very tricky thing, how do you do that, right? And very often I'm sort of angry because I know that if I don't split it, they will have to pay for Follies, so I split it by my resentment that nobody takes this in consideration. That actually takes time. It's nothing, it's not a brain surgery. It just simply takes more time to do that. And you have to treat the track slightly different way. So it's sort of like a backwards, right? It's sort of, low budget films should actually think and add extra week because they pay so little anyway. But they don't know that very often then they pay 3 times more for Follies because they didn't give the editor time to actually split production effects from the dialogue. ADR is sort of like the devil which everybody has to like, because it always happens. Although Woody Allen just reshoot the scene, he never ADRs anything, but he can in some ways afford it, and actors, I don't know, allowing him to do that. The directors are doing ADR or creating the list for the purely performance reason. My job as an ADR editor is to look for the technical problems. So I would flag the lines and I would program them. There is few programs right now which are for softwares for programming the ADR. The one which I'm using is ADR management, which I like a lot because sort of allows to do many things faster. But literally my job is to look for the technical problems with the lines or the takes which have to be ADR'd. And on the bigger budget films, I usually have a whole extra 2 weeks given by the production to screen the film for the ADR purposes, technical purposes. I will create the list, and then I go back to the production and look for the alternate takes and see if I can save something. And then I sort of start taking out these lines, if I can save them, from the ADR list. Because at the end, my extra 2 weeks is cheaper than paying the actor to come, paying the studio for the recording, and then for me extra to cut this in. But not too many producers actually understand this concept. So very often I have too much ADR. And what happens is that I do record it, I still look for the alternate lines because I think that the production, the delivery on location, the performance is most of the time better, unless actors, because it happens too that actors are just simply flapping the lines all the time, never said it the same way, so there is no way I can save it, so then I have to use the ADR. But I still try to go back to the original production and look for the different sort of takes if the delivery are very similar to save the line for the technical reason. I don't know, this off mic, somebody steps on the line, there's a plane flying, the different things which technically are sort of wrong with the production, which they have to be ADR, they have to be looped. They are different schools in a sense how you approach the ADR. Most of the time they are sort of separate editors who are dealing with ADR. So they are programming ADR without communication or very limited communication with the dialogue editor. I'm one of the, not few, but it's not too many of us who do both. And I think the film benefits from it. So, you know, very often I sort of am paid for one and do two. But in many ways, very often I don't sort of care because I think the film sounds better and I do a better job being able to, even if I record the entire line, if I'm only ADR editor and I don't know the dialogue tracks, the line is there, the dialogue editor is splitting the whole line, tones it out. When very often when I cut both, I use the beginning of the word from the production, then cut only half the syllable from the ADR and go back. And then nobody knows that there's an ADR. Right? But to do that, you have to be able to have both of these elements together. So that's why I think it's beneficial for the same person to do both. Not everybody does it, though. It's not like a rule that everybody does it. I just simply like doing that this way. I am the ADR editor, so I prepare this. There is, as I mentioned before, there is one of the programs which I use is called ADR Manager. The program requires that you have to put the correct, precise timecode up to the frame, and the frame which you mark is the first modulation of the word. And then you type the entire line the actor has to say. And then there's another column which you say why it's looped, why it's ADR'd, director request, technical problems, plane flies by, voice which doesn't belong there, overmodulated, low level. I mean, whatever the technical reason there would be. And with this list is sent to the actor, so he or she can get familiar with the ADR ahead of a time. They very seldom do. I shouldn't say that. Some of them actually do. Depends sort of. The lead actors in the film, they always do, obviously, because this is sort of, you know, this is their performance there. The secondary roles depends. Then this list is also sent to the ADR studio. The mixer, the ADR mixer just gets the list. They program this into the Pro Tools, and then we come to the studio. I am sitting with the actor and the director in the studio. Director directs the actor. My role is to see if the actor is in sync. So that is the main reason why I'm there. Also, if the actor is actually in the same oral space, if the timbre of the voice is the same, if it's too low or too high or too fast or too breathy or not breathy or nasal or not. And it's sort of my job to hear it. It's a very tricky position to be. Depends of the actor and the relationship which I have with the director. There is director who will stay nameless, who just, I don't even know why I'm there. And it's very frustrating because I can see that the actor is completely out of sync. And it requires only my one sentence. Take the breath after the first word, not before. Because they don't see it, right? They are so in it that, and they don't, I cannot say that because I'm not allowed to speak, and all of a sudden, but then I have to cut it, right? I have to make this work. And then it's a question, why this line doesn't work? Well, it doesn't. So it's a very political place to be. It's fun. It's fun to watch actors to transform themselves into the characters which they actually were a year ago. They shot 3 more films between, and they still they're capable of coming back. It's actually incredible. And then you sort of see the method actors who need time to take breath and they want to, somebody will ask you to show them the entire scene because they need to go back and they go for the nuance. Some are, like I say, call them like plumbers. You play them, they watch, and they are just perfect. They literally copy, mimic everything what they did on the screen. And some are adding little bit, they stay in the same place, but you see that there is a little change of the performance, sometimes for the better. And so sort of this is, you know, if I'm working with a director who understands my role there and the actor as well, mine or any other ADR editor, then it's a pleasure because it's a very nice collaboration and it's very creative actually. Because it's not only, you know, the thing, the precision of it, but also it's sort of, you know, how to help the actor sometimes to get to the place, not performance-wise, but technically, where he or she is taking the breath in the wrong place, or too short, or too long, or... You know, I always screen the entire project, my dialogue and ADR, because I do both. Before I go to the mix, I make sure that everything is there. Then I send this, I take my notebook. You know, when you do the ADR, there is very often a book, this take, the folder, with all the lines and all the alternate things and why you do that. Because even though, you know, while we are recording the ADR, we record 2 or 3 takes. The director usually has some preferred. So then I do the select take, I cut in the select take and I provide one alt. And I know for sure that when we come to the mix, at least 50% of the time, the director says, did we have one more take? So I have to know where it is. That's why the precision of keeping this book of how many takes we recorded, why we use this one. I have to constantly make notes because once again, the mix costs money and there is no time to explain something or look for something. I have to be very, very fast. So I simply have to make sure that everything what I need is there. The way how we work is that my assistant has because I work at home. I should edit, right? Add this to the whole story. We all work in the different places. It's a long time since I was sitting in the same room with somebody else who cut with me. And it's very common. On a very big production films, they don't allow you to do that because of the copyrights. They're afraid that film will go somewhere to the hands which shouldn't. So this is the only reason why the production companies are still paying for the editing rooms. This is the only reason, just to be safe that the film is not stolen somewhere or sent. But since I don't have this problem, or very seldom I work, so when I work at home, my assistant has an absolute copy of everything what I have. So when I finish my cut, I literally send him only my session and all the additional audio files I have created. So then I send this to the FTP to him. He opens my sessions, make sure that they are exactly, that they open, there is no problems. So now 2 identical copies exist. And we drive or take a train or go subway to the studio with 2 different drives. If, you know, it's sort of just horrible, it's not really funny, but this is how I was greeted as an assistant. You have to make sure that everything is precise, because if the track hits you when you are coming to the mix, I don't care about you, I have to know where the tracks are so I can keep mixing. So sort of this level of absurdity exists still, and for the safety that literally if something happens to me or the assistant, there is another copy of the film and they can keep mixing and somebody else will take care of funeral. So this is this is how we work. So this is sort of how we get to the mix. And you know, I have the line script with me. I have on my drive all the production sound, because sometimes it doesn't matter how many alternate takes I cut. The director will say, you know what? Maybe we can find something else. Can you just look? It's in the different scene, I remember he said this word too, and maybe it will be better. So I have to be able to, on the stage, while they are mixing, be somewhere in the corner, have an access to the Pro Tools and actually keep looking for it. And then you sit on the mix, and half of the time I look for shoes. Because, you know, it's essentially my job is done, right? And on the beginning, I was sitting for 8 hours on the edge of the chair, watching Mixer what he's doing. Today, I'm much more relaxed at the mix. First of all, I know what I've done. Of course, there are mistakes. They always happen, but they are minor little things. I never had a calamity. So it's boring. He's keep cueing the same line over and over and over. So I mean, everybody loves it. I always look for shoes because actually I do. But, you know, then it comes the moment when we screen the reel, and then everybody takes notes, and, you sort of start addressing them one by one. So mix is sort of, okay, it's a fun place. I like to go to the mix, but at the same time, now I'm relaxed enough that I can sort of zoom out and zoom in, depends on sort of the desire. And working with the mixer, the same mixer for a long time, or few of them, but you sort of know them, you know their style, you understand when they get tense, when I should focus, or when they're struggling with something. So you sort of have, your eyes and ears in many, many places. You watch the director, if he's happy or not. It's like everywhere when you work with people. You have to be aware of them. Most of the time, the low-budget film is made most of the time by unexperienced director, right? I mean, sort of comes with the territory. Somebody has a great idea, it's a great script, they don't have money, they want to make it, and they sort of jump. And I think this is how many very great directors sort of became great directors, because they jumped into the deep water and they learn on their own mistakes. I think the biggest advice I would give them, standing from the position of 30 years of experience and 55 years of age, just be humble. If people who you hire have more experience than you do, and you hire them for this reason, trust them. If people who have a lot of experience decide to take your film and work on it, they're not doing this for their career. They already had it. They already added 120 films. So it's not really enhancing my career or anybody else, right? It's not doing much. I do it because I love to do it. I do it because I want to stay in business, because I like the job I have. I do it because I like your film, and I do it because you pay me something. So there's a combination of many things. But definitely the monetary aspect of it, it's not the first one. And it's not also that the young director's film will skyrocket my career. Because essentially whenever I am in my career, there is very little room for me to go. I just simply want to keep my plateau and not lose my professionalism. So if they are humble and actually understand this aspect and show, I'm not talking about the respect. I'm talking about sort of take what you can from people who've done it 120 times more than you did. This is the most frustrating aspect of working with the young directors. And I'm not saying that all of them are like that, right, by any means. But there is certain level of, because it comes from the insecurity, so they want, and they are actually the captains of the ship at the mix. Their word is the last word. And very often they dig their heels because they think that they are losing face, or they made a mistake and they don't want to own it. None of us who work with the first time or directors who are directing low budget films, if we make comments, it's not coming out of malice. In the contrary, we actually care. I could just sit and say, just go on. Not my film, why would I care? If we open our mouth, it's because we care. So I think sort of the advice from the very creative point of view, just take advantage. If you decide to hire people who have an experience, just take advantage of it, really. The other sort of, advice would be choose the location wise. Think about sound. It's actually integral part of your film. Don't have the same, saying that we'll fix it in the post. It's sort of like a joke, but it's not funny. And at the end, either costs more money or just simply gives you the worst soundtracks. I know I probably sound a little bit pompous and sort of old, sort of giving, it's patronizing what I'm saying, but I see it for so many years. And older I get, sort of more I see, because I'm getting older and they are getting younger. So I have a slightly different perspective to it. But I don't know, technically it's just hire people who know more than you do. I think I know what I want to say. When you say, what if you are going to do it by yourself? If you heard about, there is a movie which you love, and you love it because the cameraman, the image is wonderful, or you love the mix, or you love the music, just look who these people are. What do you like about it? And try to contact them. This is what I also tell my students. Don't be afraid of contact people who have awards. They're literally the same humans as you are. And we all are as good as our last job. So if I want something 15 years ago, it really doesn't matter. I'm working on a shitty job now. It means that this is what I'm worth. It's really how it functions, right? So we will not shut the door. In the contrary, it actually feels like a pat on the back, right? It's a feather in my hat. Somebody asking for advice. And people will share. So if you have to do it all yourself, just try to find people who you can trust and just pick their brains, and they will give it. 90% of people who are working in this business will share. And partially, I think one of the reasons why I love teaching comes from the fact that the apprenticeship doesn't exist. There used to be a position, a paid position, that the young person who graduated from film school or from whatever, came from the street, wanted to learn how to make movies, would come and was paid $500 a week and had a full benefits coming with it, and was listening 8, 9, 12 hours a day of people who are having slightly bigger experience and learn the lingo, learn the skills, the aesthetics of it, and it doesn't exist anymore. So we actually are starving to pass this knowledge to somebody actually to listen. And many of my colleagues who are more or less my age, we have this conversation when we have lunch, that it's sort of like, what do I do with this, right? And especially that then we work with people who are much younger than we are, and we see mistakes they make. And the fact that they're not aware of the mistakes, it's sort of, it hurts because we spend lifetime doing that, so you want somebody to do it correctly. Not that we are doing this the best, but there is a certain aspect of the professionalism which is sort of missed. It's sort of been lost in some ways because there is no way of passing this knowledge in a very organic way. They have to pay $50,000 to learn it.